Was the recent drug boat attack in the Caribbean Sea a war crime? That's the question I've been getting over and over again in my email inbox. A bunch of people on Twitter suddenly became experts in maritime law. And, I'm leaving for Estonia on Monday for a NATO cyber exercise, so I kind of need to knock this out. You've probably seen the headline that U.S. planes have been blowing up drug boats off Venezuela. More than 80 people have been killed. There's one story that Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth allegedly ordered a second strike on some survivors that were clinging to the wreckage of a boat near Trinidad. So I want to do three things here. I want to walk through what we actually know from open sources. Number two, I want to explain the law of war and what maritime laws say about shooting at people in the water. Number three, I want to talk about this very weird situation where the president is kind of running a lethal campaign without Congress ever voting for a war. I'm going to try very hard not to make this red team good, blue team good. I just want to explain the architecture of what's happening. I call balls and strikes. I don't care about politics. Quick note here. If you have to go to an office Christmas party this year, why not do it in my NORAD Christmas sweater? I guarantee you that people will come up and talk to you. I even have like a Hanukkah version. Start with the basics. Since September 1st, 2025, the U.S. military has been conducting strikes on small boats in the Caribbean Sea, and I believe the Eastern Pacific as well. The Pentagon later put all this under this umbrella name, Operation Southern Spirit. Public data pulled together kind of reads as follows. There's been about 21, maybe 22 strikes on vessels. About 80 some people have been killed. There were 2 survivors that were captured alive and repatriated. And I believe 11 boats were hit in the Caribbean and 11 in the Pacific or so. The Trump administration says these boats are run by narco-terrorists from groups like the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua and Colombia's ELN. What the administration hasn't done, though, is release detailed public evidence for each boat. So from the outside, like just you and me, all we see is video of a small vessel and then fire. Now, just to be clear, drug trafficking in that region is absolutely real. Venezuela is a transit country for Colombian cocaine heading mostly to Europe, and there are gangs and corrupt officials involved. But that's kind of different from us being able to look at a particularly blurry boat and say, oh yeah, those 11 people are definitely cartel gunmen. And this is actually so concerning the United Kingdom that they stopped sharing intelligence with the United States. They don't want any part of this. So like a high level, we are running what looks like a limited air campaign against suspected drug trafficking at sea, far from U.S. shores, using the Navy and possibly Air Force platforms. The most controversial story so far in the attacks are this attack in Trinidad that happened near the 1st or 2nd of September. According to reporting from the Washington Post and others, here's what allegedly happened. Intelligence flags a Venezuelan boat as a possible smuggling vessel tied to Tren de Aragua. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is briefed. According to multiple officials, he says something very close to kill everybody. The first missile strikes the boat. Most of the people on board are killed. The vessel is destroyed. Then the ISR, Intelligence Surveillance Reconnaissance Aircraft, spot 2 survivors in the water clinging to wreckage. A second strike is ordered. These 2 men are killed. In total, 11 people die in that incident. Hegseth denies that he gave an illegal order. He says the operation is lawful. The people in the boat were designated terrorists, and the videos being shown are out of context. He also said that, yes, a second strike was conducted, but the vessel was a hazard, maritime navigation hazard. He also contrasted this with the previous administration, saying things like, well, they killed terrorists. We killed terrorists too. Now, full disclosure here, if you know me, you know that a lot of times when I get on a flight to Florida, someone's going to end up in the dirt. I have no problems dropping bombs on bad guys. I'm really good at finding people to drop bombs on. They say God gives everyone a gift. He didn't make me a poet. I mean, I'll find you, then they'll commence weaponeering. I'll go home, crack open a beer, order a pizza, and watch the Wizards. Although at 2-16, maybe not. I think the Wizards are the worst friggin' team in the league. Maybe they could actually win a game if we dropped a bomb on the opposing team. Now, critics, including former military lawyers, some members of Congress, people on Twitter, look at that alleged second strike on unarmed survivors and say, wow, that sounds a lot like a war crime. And this is kind of where it's important to separate emotion from facts, or my team good, your team bad, from reality. We do not have The full ISR video of exactly what happened. We don't have the classified intelligence packages. We don't have the exact rules of engagement. We don't have a list of who those 11 dead people from that strike were. What we have is multiple independent outlets describing the same basic sequence here. First strike destroys the boat, survivors in the water. Second strike ensures there's no survivors, and officials on background confirm what they're told to do. And I think everyone's actually getting their information from the Washington Post. So we might only have one source of information here. And we're in this uncomfortable place where the allegation is specific and somewhat credible, but we, the public, don't have the original tape. So anybody who's commenting on this has no idea what they're talking about. So what does the law actually say about people in the water? Well, let's park the politics, right, and talk law. Because on this point, the law is actually pretty darn clear. There's two bodies of law that matter. The law of armed conflict, the LOAC, and the Geneva Convention stuff. And then there's maritime law or law of the sea. This is what ships have to do when they see people who are in distress at sea. Once you're in an armed conflict at sea, Geneva Convention 2 says, wounded, sick, and shipwrecked members of the armed forces have to be respected and protected and cared for in all circumstances. Shipwrecked includes people who were forced to abandon a destroyed vessel, which is, lawyers speak for, guys floating in the ocean, right? Additional Protocol 1 adds a famous hors combat rule. If someone is out of the fight, unconscious, wounded, or otherwise incapable of defending themselves, and they're not trying to escape or be sneaky, you can't make them the object of attack. So, got a dude in a life jacket, no gun, no boat, no engine, 50 miles offshore. Dude's not a target anymore. He's a rescue and detention problem. You can absolutely capture this guy. You can stick him in handcuffs, question him. If there's evidence, you can prosecute him later, maybe for drug trafficking or terrorism. Yeah. But what you can't legally do is say, prisoners are just a hassle, shoot them. That's why a deliberate second strike on clearly helpless survivors is ringing alarm bells for law of war experts, if it happened. Now add maritime law on top of that. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, Article 98, every state has to tell its shipmasters to render assistance to any person found at sea in danger of being lost and proceed with all speed to help people in distress as long as they can do it without putting their own ship and crew at serious risk. So the Safety of Life at Sea Convention basically says the same thing. Masters are bound to help people in distress at sea regardless of their nationality or legal status. Now there's no asterisk that says except cartel guys, right? So both the LOAC and maritime law kind of point in the same direction here, right? You can attack a hostile boat that's a threat. Once it's destroyed and the survivors are helpless in the water, you don't get to keep shooting them. You do have a duty, if the circumstances permit, to rescue them. In fact, in my new book, Lies to Rule Men, which is so new, I don't even have a copy of it, but you can get it on Amazon or the link below. There's a scene where Air Force pilots shoot up an enemy container ship and watch people hop in a lifeboat. And then they're upset when the Navy doesn't immediately come and pick up the survivors. I think most pilots, even ones who just destroyed a ship, would want some effort made at rescuing survivors. So that's the legal baseline there. Whatever happened near Trinidad has to be measured against the legal baseline standard, not against a Call of Duty cutscene. And a lot of freaking people get their war crime knowledge from Call of Duty. Now let's talk about the domestic law side, because this is where it gets really freaking weird. You would think that the U.S. military running 20 plus strikes, killing more than 80 people off the coast of another country would have like a declaration of war, or at least an authorization use of military force, AUMF, that says, yes, Congress is cool with this. We don't. There is no specific AUMF for Venezuela, the Caribbean, or drug traffickers at sea. So what's the legal hook that the administration is using? I don't know. The White House has notified Congress that the U.S. is in a non-international armed conflict with certain narco-terrorist organizations operating at sea. They're relying on the president's Article 2 commander-in-chief powers, coupled with some Justice Department opinions that argues that these are limited, low-risk air operations, and so they don't really trigger the War Power Resolution's 60-day, you have to stop or get authorization rule. In plain English, they're saying this is an aggressive counter-drug enforcement mission rather than a new war. And this isn't really a brand new move. Like, administrations of both parties have had similar legal gymnastics for like Libya in 2011, various strikes against ISIS. More recently, things like hitting Houthi targets in the Red Sea under old authorization for use of military force, or in the case of attacking Iran's nuclear program, just kind of doing it and asking for permission later. The difference here is the target set. Instead of like militants with AKs in Syria, it's guys on fiberglass boats in the Caribbean. So what's Congress doing about it? Nothing. I never thought I would see like Congress kind of willingly give up their power. Just say, yeah, we're just not going to touch this. And I've never seen an organization just willingly give up power before. It is like fascinating to watch. So the net effect here is the executive branch is running a lethal operation at sea. Congress is writing strongly worded letters, right? I mean, at least some are. But nobody's actually pulled the big levers that it actually has under the Constitution. And this is baffling to me. And you're talking to a guy who doesn't even mind endless war. Hell, I don't think we ever should have left Afghanistan. I mean, Bagram would have been a great way to threaten China. But let's get some kind of oversight on this thing before we start bombing here. You know, I want to be really transparent about the limits of anyone sitting at a desk with open sources can say. Based on public data and mainstream reporting, it is fair to say that the U.S. has conducted around 21, 22 airstrikes since September, killing about 80 or so people, and only 2 survivors have been captured. It's fair to say the administration framed these strikes as strikes on narco-terrorists, but it hasn't released evidence tying each boat to these groups. It's fair to say that the first strike near Trinidad used language like kill everybody, but we don't know how true that is, and no footage has been released. And it's also fair to say that legal experts in the law of armed conflict and maritime law say that if survivors are clearly shipwrecked out of the fight, you have to make every effort to rescue them. There is no Venezuela/Caribbean specific authorization use of military force. There's none. That's all pretty solid. What we don't know is the fully classified intel on each vessel, SIGINT, human intelligence, pattern of life, all the nerdy stuff that I do. Whether every dead person that was blown up was a cartel guy or a fisherman. We don't know that. We don't know whether the 2 survivors, how they looked on screen. Were they visibly armed? Could they even see them? Was it blurry? Was there a risk of explosives? Was there a risk of man-portable air defenses? Were they trying to reach another hostile vessel? We don't know. The exact rules of engagement that the air crews were given about survivals in the water, we don't know that either. We might never know this because you generally don't publish the rules of engagement because the adversary will try to skirt the rules if they know the rules of engagement. We don't have the full Department of Justice, Department of Defense legal memos on top of all this. So anyone who tells you this was definitely 100% legal or this was definitely 100% murder is filling in a lot of blanks with their own politics, and that's bad. That's against everything I've told you to do. I can tell you what the law says, I can tell you what reporting says, but I can't see inside a compartmentalized briefing book. I can't. So what do we do with this? Well, I'm going to leave you this because this is kind of where my own concern is. On paper, we're not at war with Venezuela. Congress has now passed an authorization to use military force. The targets are criminal suspects, not uniformed soldiers. In practice, we have a carrier strike group and aircraft flying lethal missions off another country's coast. We've killed over 80 people from the air. We're relying on a legal theory that says this is just a limited enforcement action the president can do on his own. At the same time, the basic rules of armed conflict and maritime law say once you sink a boat and the survivors are helpless in the water, you're supposed to rescue and detain when you can. You can't double tap them because taking prisoners is inconvenient, although we don't even know if that really happened. So my question here, and you don't have to answer this in a partisan way, is do we really want this much lethal freaking power being used far from home on a really thin legal foundation with very little transparency? You can support being tough on cartels and still be deeply uncomfortable with the idea of missiles being used as floating death warrants. You give me legal justification, I will be on the next flight to Doral, Florida. Please. It's 40 freaking degrees in Estonia. It's 71 in Doral, Florida. Where do you think I want to be right now? You can also be suspicious of every anonymous source in a newspaper and still say, you know what? If we're going to start a de facto campaign against another country's coast, maybe Congress should actually vote. That's my breakdown. Grab my Christmas sweater from Bunker Branding. Grab Lies to Rule Men off Amazon. Help support the channel at ryanbeth.substack.com. All right, I've got to go pack for Estonia. Thank you for watching. Do you have a Christmas party to go to this year and you want to be the coolest guy there? Head on over to bunkerbranding.com. Get my NORAD Christmas sweater. Features a Canadian CF-18 and an American F-22 flying jointly, protecting the skies during Christmas. You will be the coolest person at the Christmas party, and I guarantee you, people who want to talk about fighter jets will come over to you. So head on over to bunkerbranding.com and be that cool guy at the Christmas party.